my name's Josh, and I'm with Love Grace Unity. We're a new organization that's come about to try and help facilitate some real change in the world. We see a lot of pain, a lot of strife, and a lot of turmoil, a lot of anger, a lot of resentment, a lot of overall just pain. And what we really want to do and what we're striving to do is be a voice of reason in the midst of that. We believe in the power and the presence of Jesus to be able to come in and facilitate change and heal hurts and heal divides that exist. And so everything that we're about is about trying to bring reconciliation to the world. And while we know we'll get pushback here and there, and we're ready to take it on because we believe in what we're doing, and we really believe in the cause that we're putting forth, and that's to bring people into community from all different cultural, ethnic, racial backgrounds, whatever have you. It's really about peace and love, and as children of God, we're really all we're one people, and we're all part of the church, and we're all part of the inheritance of the kingdom of heaven. So what we're here to do today is talk with Nakia. She's graciously agreed to come on and chat with us about one of the specific things that we're seeing in the world today, and that is the conflict that we see in racial communication in the United States. And there's been numerous events and things that have transpired that have launched and catapulted huge movements. And while we are on board with the mission of a lot of those, and the final mission and bringing reconciliation and fairness to everybody, we want to just kind of open up the conversation and be able to have communication and show that people from different backgrounds can talk and people can have conversations and we can discuss difficult topics and things and move forward together to make a better world for our kids, a better world for us. So Nakia, thank you for being here.
You're welcome.
We're very excited to get to interview you. This is take 2. We had a first interview, but we're very excited to talk again. And this time what I've done is I've gone ahead and pulled some different statistics and things from different areas, different research centers and some books that I've been reading and working through, and we're just going to kind of talk through them. We implore you to kind of engage with us in the conversation. I know you can't talk with us on the video, but just kind of listen in and hear what's being said. So to open up, we'll give Nakia a chance to give us her background and kind of where she's from and where she grew up and where she is now.
All right. Hello, everyone. I am originally from Alexandria, Louisiana, where I was born and I was raised there. I traveled quite a bit with my parents who were active duty Air Force. So we lived in different countries, in the Philippines, in different states throughout the United States. And my travels have landed me here in Georgia.
Great. And Georgia is very hot.
Yes.
But I guess being from the South originally, you're used to that anyway. So I know I'm coming from Michigan. I guess I grew up in Virginia, but coming from Michigan, it was definitely had to get used to the heat down here. So cool. Well, we're here today to specifically talk about racial issues, and I've collected a few quotes from reputable authors and research centers. And so really what I kind of want to dig into is we'll talk about them, we'll kind of talk about the data, and then we'll talk about your experiences and whether or not they affirm or don't affirm. We won't get too much into kind of allegorical evidence, but I think it's helpful to kind of see, data certainly shows us the overall trend, but there's differing aspects of that as we go throughout life and things, and different people. There's always people that don't conform to what the data says too. So let's kind of talk about where we're at in our neighborhood. Nakia and I actually live in the same neighborhood, and we'll kind of just discuss how these impact your day-to-day life. So to start off, before we get too much into the data, I just kind of want to ask you, from your perspective, is racism still really apparent to you today? Does it still exist today?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Do you have any specific examples you want to give us about that?
Throughout my life, it hasn't been a whole lot as far as an everyday issue, but it has been an issue throughout my life that I can't ignore.
Right.
It kind of reminds me that I'm still black,
Right.
as much as there have been laws and huge strides in America that have been able to include all races. When I do experience racism, that lets me know that we still have not come as a country as far as we need to be.
Right.
So one big example that I could think of is having applied for a job and having known the other applicants in their resume, having known that I was more qualified than the other person, and the only difference was our skin color.
Right.
And the other person received the job who did not even have the qualifications for the job.
Right.
That let me know that it was racism, but it affected me in the way to just understand that I can't give up. But it was just there.
Right. Right. Well, and I would, it's great that you have the attitude of not giving up and pushing forward. Not that you should have to have that attitude at all. But unfortunately, we live in a broken world. You and I both agree on that. And, there's things that we always have to fight for and fight against. But I don't think not everybody in the African American community necessarily shares that idea, right?
Right.
Some people kind of accept it as the status quo, and it shouldn't be. But there's certainly an aspect that I think believe that way, and the same goes for the Caucasian or any other community that people just kind of accept the status quo and seem to be resilient to change.
Right.
And we'll I'm glad that's a good segue into our first data discussion. One of the things that I pulled from the Pew Research Center, and this was I think this was a study that was done in April of 2019. So most Americans, 65%, including majorities across racial and ethnic groups, say it has become more common for people to express racist or racially insensitive views since Trump was elected president. A smaller but substantial share, 45%, say this has become more acceptable. So something, I'm actually going to skip a little bit ahead of my notes here.
Okay.
Something that I read in in a book by Beverly Tatum called Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria? Talks about how the election of President Obama was actually a catalyst for racial, I guess, strife or discomfort. And so this is a quote directly from her book. It says, "To the extent that the election of Barack Obama disrupted the usual narrative of white victory, it represented unpredictability, and unpredictability creates anxiety. And during the last 20 years, we have seen the level of anxiety rise in our nation. It is not just the reality that a black man could be president of the United States that has threatened the status quo." And then after that, Dr. Tatum kind of goes into the financial collapse of 2008, the financial threat in the waning months of George W. Bush's presidency, the 9/11 terror attacks. So there's all these things that kind of cobbled together to create this sort of perfect storm to cause this. So thinking about what the Pew Research Center said about how the election of Trump, it has actually made it more commonplace for racist remarks, but also kind of the election of Barack Obama. What has your experience been since both of those elections and kind of conversations you've had day to day and sort of racism in general?
I agree with what the writer said, the unpredictability and the rise of anxiety. And certainly I've seen that in the culture. And with both of those presidents in office, there's a great difference. And I think the biggest difference is the tone and the attitude of the leadership. And so if you have leaders in power that have a certain attitude and a certain tone, from the top, it's going to follow. Right. So who's ever in power, I think people are more comfortable with taking their lead. And so for me, I have seen less accountability with bad behavior.
Right.
That's the best way I can put it. Less accountability.
Right.
So therefore you have people that have strong views and beliefs that before they could kind of mask those or just keep them silent. Now it's out in the open because that's how the leadership is handling the tone of attitudes and beliefs in the nation.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I had a thought and it just kind of ran away from me, so I apologize for my pause there. But yeah, I know it's hard too because there's this kind of, I don't really know how to describe it, but like, a lot of my network is, I'm a very traditionally conservative Christian, grew up in a conservative Christian household. Now that said, where I grew up in Virginia, we didn't have much racial dissonance. I mean, there was certainly some aspect to it, but the high school I grew up in and where I kind of came to, I had friends from multiple cultural backgrounds. My parents never had an issue with me going over to anybody's house to spend the night. There was never a talk of, hey, that person's different from you. You shouldn't be hanging out with them. I never had that. So, but having moved to the South, and I know we've kind of talked outside of this about geographics and other things that they certainly play a role in consistent or persistent racism and how people talk and the ideas they have. But one of the things I've noticed is there is a lot of my sphere that seems, since Trump was elected, to be a little bit more emphatic about some things that they may not have said previously. And so from my perspective, it's very similar. There's been just a big discord and disconnect. But the other side of the equation and the side of the coin is I think we're struggling to find a balance. Something that I deal with a lot is, so we seem to be in this eternal struggle of conservative, liberal, Democrat, Republican. Those are the only two options. Right. Don't even get me started on that. But there's like this. There's this disconnect where there's a lack of understanding between, primarily our two different communities, right? But even still, I have African American friends that talk about conservatism too, but not like it's a religion, but conservative values as far as the economy goes, because I know for me, I've been very torn with. I believe capitalism is a good thing, and there's a lot of people that don't agree with me on that, but I believe competition breeds innovation, breeds success, and that it's a good thing for that to happen. But I also see the disadvantages that are still present based on previous laws that existed, from slavery to Jim Crow laws. There are things that put people at a disadvantage in getting forward, and so generationally, those disadvantages, while on the law books they don't exist anymore, culturally and practically they still do exist. And so just to kind of get your perspective on that, I don't know any other way to ask this, but like, how do I handle that?
Handle that it exists?
Well, not handle that it exists, but my default it's almost like I have to play this struggle where, okay, do I vote for somebody that is going to do the things that I believe are better for humanity in some regards, but in other regards I don't believe are better for humanity, or do I vote for somebody that I believe is going to strengthen the economy and that will create an environment where everybody can succeed, but they don't do anything about helping anybody succeed? It's this, and it's not, you might not have the answer to that. It's just, I guess, do you have any thoughts on that?
I do, and I've thought about it often, and I had to take it all the way back to the existence of this country. The founding fathers, they wrote a lot about their values and beliefs, and one of the biggest things that was stated was that all men are created equal.
Right.
However, that has never been lived out in America.
Right.
So it's the two tensions that we find since the beginning of our country until now. So you mentioned laws. Most of the laws are better than before, but the way that they are practically lived out is much different. Mm-hmm. And so I believe there's not a true way to solve it, but just becoming better and better and better with time.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So, for example, I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
I mean, because that's a broad issue that we're speaking about.
Right.
So, for example, what I've seen through reading evidence and studies and surveys with the Washington Post or Forbes magazine, they talk about the judicial system. So, when you have a black person that gets arrested versus a white person that gets arrested for the same crime, generally the black person does a longer sentence.
Right.
That's how it's played out. Like the law convicted both people,
right,
but the punishment is far greater for the African American person.
Right.
So how do we fix that?
Right.
Is to continue to make more laws and continue to look at the survey and the data that shows, hey, this is not equal.
Right.
So, because I think even with myself, I didn't realize how much it was unequal until I did look at the data. You know, we know it's there, but when you look at the facts, deal with the facts and create laws and put people in positions of power, that's going to have a very fair mindset.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And it's a difficult, it's a struggle because there's this whole moral side of me that, you know, especially based on my faith, where a lot of the things I see and a lot of the things, and I might get disowned for this from my family, but a lot of the values that come out of kind of the conservative talk tend to just not be very humanitarian. And while I do ascribe to the idea that, you know, again, competition is good, and that just comes back to me. I was an economics major in college, and looking at the different models and stuff, it just makes sense. If you take away incentive to work by just redistributing everything, it makes it harder to have people in those positions that are higher up because there's no incentive to get there anymore if everything is just kind of level ground. But so there's this one side where it's like, okay, well, I think if I were to choose this candidate, then I would see the humanitarian side of things, with the exception there's some stuff there's some things there I don't want to get into on this, but there's some humanitarian aspects of that I think would be vehemently against humans, but at the same time, it's like I want to take the best of both worlds and just mingle it together, but we don't have that option, and so it kind of seems like we're left with just sort of dealing with the system, and taking it on ourselves at kind of a grassroots front, at this front, you know, at the lower level, and talking and having conversation. And that's really what, you know, anybody watching this, that's what I want the big takeaway to be. And I think Nakia agrees with me, is we're not going to solve this at like a national level.
Right.
And we're not here to do that. We're not purporting to have all the answers. What we have to do is start understanding each other and not demonize each other for the various things that come about. At least I think. And hope, it's difficult because I know November I'm going to struggle. And there's a third party candidate in case anybody wants to check them out. But, all right, so we'll get back to so the politics. I mean, that could take us years to talk about and kind of really discuss and dissect, and there's so many underlying implications to that. But we'll get back to kind of just the cultural aspect of it, because I think that's what we have the most power over.
Right.
So, all right. So the Pew Research Center, again, same study. They've got this whole chart on here that talks about that most black adults actually have a negative view about the country's racial progress. And so the chart pits white opinions against black opinions against all adults. And just as a caveat, the white population in this is strictly white. There's no mix, no nothing. Same for the black population. 100% African American, nothing else. And then they do have an overall result, though, which kind of linearizes the data a little bit. So the first one is and it's basically whether or not they agree with the statements. So the first statement was race relations in the U.S. are generally bad. 56% of white people agreed, 71% of black people agreed, and then 58% of all adults agreed. And then for the rest of them, I'll kind of give a recap, because the first few are fairly close relatively. The next one is that Trump has made race relations worse. 49% of white people agreed, 73% of black agreed, 56% of the total adult population that they surveyed agreed. And then the legacy of slavery affects the position of black people in American society today at a great deal fair amount. 58% of white people agreed, while 84% of black people agreed. So this is where it starts to separate out a little bit, where there's a pretty distinct difference. And then the next two are even bigger. Our country hasn't gone far enough in giving blacks equal rights with whites. 37% of whites agreed, and 78% of blacks agreed. And then not not at all likely that black people will eventually have equal rights. So only this one really hit me. Only 7% of white people agreed with that black people would eventually not have equal right, or like would never really scale to having equal rights with white people. But 50% of black people agreed. So there is 50% of the African American population that does agree that equal rights are coming. But I think one of the challenges that we're running into with that is, like we talked about, on the books the laws are different, but it's a cultural thing that we have to face, right? And so it's kind of this disconnect that we have, where from my perspective. So let me ask you this: from my perspective, as far as like the legal writing in the law books goes, there's nothing really that's explicitly against one race or culture at this point. And in fact, in some regards, I know when I went to college, there was vastly more scholarship opportunities for people that were not like me. So not Caucasian middle class males. Like I had academic scholarships available and maybe sports, but I played music, so that wasn't an option for me. And I mean, there are some music scholarships, but let's be honest, the world values sports a lot more than music. So from your perspective, do you think that's true, that as far as like by the books, the laws are the same, but I guess the way they're administered, like you were talking about earlier, they're just not enforced the same way?
I still believe that they're just not enforced the same way. It's definitely a cultural thing. It's like you said, the laws are pretty much equal, pretty much like you can marry who you want to marry,
Right.
you can live where you want to live. You know, you have voter rights, you have rights to do just about anything, but there are still obstacles that are placed.
Right.
And I think that that's where the disadvantage comes in with African Americans, is the obstacles that I believe are many times on purpose placed.
Right. And so when you say obstacles, can you expand on that a little bit? Are you talking about like actual policies that are put in place, or is it more like fear from people, or just institutionalized things within different cultures?
It's a mixture.
Okay.
So you have systematic, and you've heard this before,
Mm-hmm.
racism. You also have things put in place that, like the ability to accumulate wealth.
Mm-hmm.
That's a far disadvantage. I mean, because for generations, the majority in this country have, just had a head start on just accumulating wealth, period, as far as being able to buy homes that historically African Americans could not, being able to obtain loans from banks that African Americans could not. Now, African Americans are catching up, but then when you find that you have student loan debt, that disqualifies you. Of course, if you have a felony, that disqualifies you from voting. And a lot of the arrests are, if we're only 13% of the whole country, but the arrests are far greater. So that's where there's an obstacle that's placed on purpose. So being arrested for something simple, like I mentioned before, or where there's more grace for the majority, there's less grace for the minority.
Right.
You're going to get punished with the severity of the law, and that's going to just disqualify you from being able to accumulate wealth.
Right.
So that's where we see it in the culture.
Right. Yeah, and I'm curious too on the socioeconomic side of things too, because a lot of the data that I've pulled here really talks about attitudes, mm-hmm. and it seems generally that the overall attitude, I mean, this one chart was really, really revealing to me. It talks about people that support mixed races in the same schools, interracial marriage, and then this last one was kind of, it's worded a little bit funny, but it trended the percentage of people that are opposed to laws against interracial marriage. So they're actively opposed to laws against interracial marriage.
Okay.
So it is a good thing, but it's just worded funny. And so, I mean, from early on, so I think the first data point they have here is from 1940. Only about 31% of people agreed that schools should be integrated. Now it's like 96%. People, man, 1960, it was like 5% of people agreed with interracial marriage. And there was a point in the article, too, about that, which I thought was interesting, is that was kind of held on both sides of the equation. African Americans didn't think that they should be marrying white people, and white people didn't think. So it was, there was some, I guess, some commonality then in agreement. But so, we've talked a lot about the kind of, there does seem to be a different attitude now. But so it makes it hard to explain why we still have this dissonance, when we look at the other data, when we see the incarceration rate is so much higher for African Americans. And I think I got that chart in here too. Yeah, so 12%, and this was back in 2017 was when this data was pulled, but 12% of the African American population, or 12% of the entire United States adult population is African American, and 64% is Caucasian or white. But 33% of the prison population is African American, while 30% is Caucasian or white. So, I mean, 13% is not very big.
Right.
So it's very difficult to account for that without at least having the discussion or talk about systemic racism. And so, what experiences in your life have you seen around that? Because so it's hard for me to comprehend or really get my head around it, right? Because to be honest, when I get pulled over by a cop, I get scared. I don't I don't like those red and blue lights in my mirror, and I haven't been pulled over a lot in my life, and that may be because of factors I can't control. But I know the couple times I've had very, very nice police officers, and I've had very mean police officers that just thought I was up to no good. So, from your experience, where do you see that in your community? Where, why are, and there might not be an answer to why, but what are you seeing about people being taken to prison for minor offenses, being pulled over more often, more likely to be have their car searched, that might be driving these numbers? Is it like just a socioeconomic thing where it's people, because generally people in lower income classes tend to commit more crimes, and it's not necessarily a factor of skin color. So do you see it as there's just socioeconomic disadvantage that still exists that's kind of driving that, or is there something else that you see?
A lack of resources definitely aggravates the situation when you talk about crime and violence in any community. So yes, I do believe that part of it is socioeconomic. But for me, growing up in a middle class family, I was able to see both sides.
Right.
So, while I certainly have been around people who were less fortunate than I, or had less than I was around people that were mostly had what I had. And so the thing that I saw just growing up from a child until an adult, being raised in a fairly Christian family, somewhat.
Right.
And I say that just because, the emphasis was not so much on attending church, but it was more or less being a good person.
Right.
So I was told in school, don't start fights, don't, get along with everyone, because if you do, you're going to be punished more.
Right.
So, I mean, as an African American child, that's what we hear growing up, that you have to perform better. You have to stay away from trouble. Like, you have to really try.
Right.
Because if you do, you're going to be marked for life.
Right.
So that's where I see the trends that we're seeing now, that if you get caught up in any type of illegal activity, from everything, from the car that you drive, from the way that you look, from where you work, we're taught as kids what to stay away from. And if you don't, you're going to become a target.
Right.
So it's easily seen in the culture of what you
Right.
can and cannot do.
Right.
But if you stay neutral, for the most part, you'll stay under the radar. So, I mean, I've been pulled over by the police before, and it's about the same as you. I've been treated nicely, and I've been treated mean.
Right.
However, I believe that what saved me was certain affiliations that I had. So,
Right.
being a part of the military, I now become a more trusted citizen
Right.
than if I was not.
Right.
Um, Being a woman sometimes put me at a greater advantage than a African American male, because most of the time African American women are not seen as aggressive.
Right. Right.
So those things give me a little bit of grace, but certainly I've seen the opposite for other people.
Right.
So the conversations that we have at church or in the living room or with our friends is, wow, this happened to so and so, and this
Right.
was the barber down the street, or this was the coach at the high school, or
Right.
someone that was in my community that they have to fight extra hard to prove their innocence or
Right.
to just redeem themselves from something that they have done the same as a white person.
Right. And
So,
have you heard at all? So I work with Celebrate Recovery a good bit, and so I'm around lots of ex-cons and things like that. And I know a good number of them, but the ones that are coming to my mind have all been white. Have actually been able to get some of their past record expunged based on good behavior. Have you heard any of that from anybody that you know that's gone to prison from your
No.
community? No.
no,
Yeah.
no. Excuse me. What comes to mind is I have a very good friend. I knew him when we were both 20, and he committed a crime that he was guilty for, and 30 something years later, he still has to face that.
Wow.
He did his time, but it's not going away. And that's
Right.
true for most of my friends that had the unfortunate past of committing a crime or going to jail. Unless they had a tremendous amount of money,
Right.
that seemed to be the thing that was able to get their record wiped clean.
Right.
Knowing the right person or having a large sum of money.
Right.
So
That's in,
other
yeah.
than that, nope.
Yeah, I know some of the people I've been talking about have talked about kind of some of the money side of it too, but some of them are just like, yeah, the judge told me if I had X number of years without any incidents, they would just
Right.
wipe it, and there was like it was just kind of an expectation. Wow, oof, that's heavy stuff. All right, we're a little bit mixed up on the
Okay. It's okay.
on the notes here, but that's okay. All right, so some of this kind of just reiterates some of the things that we've talked about, and I know we're kind of getting close on our time limit here. So, so obviously we both agree that there's work to be done,
Right.
and there's issues that still persist, and hopefully I've conveyed. I'm frustrated, because I really want to be an activist, and I want to do something, but it's hard to figure out what to do because it seems like so much of it is just out of my hands and out of my control. And certainly there's aspects of it, and we're kind of told this. I don't know if it's a fable, but we're told the story of who you vote for, that determines everything. But I don't necessarily buy into that completely because we are a state-run system where the federal government certainly has laws and things, but it takes years for that to get implemented. And so I think, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but it just feels like it's a cultural thing where we have to start just communicating at low levels and watch it just kind of spread at like, all I can, a virus spreads, but that's not a good thing. Maybe like a vaccine, you interject a little bit of it into your system, and as the other pieces come and the other parts of your immune system and your white blood cells come and create antibodies for that, it starts spreading throughout the body and creating this whole system of being able to heal and block it out. And that's why I'm so glad we're doing what we're doing, because it's just the conversation, and I know it means a lot to me and it reveals a lot to me. So thank you for coming and talking about it. I do. There's one last thing I want to discuss on it too.
Okay.
So It's not so much, we can talk till we're blue in the face about the statistics, and people will probably come on here in the comment section and put other statistics on there that argue against our statistics. But the fact that we're having a conversation at all about it means something exists. I mean, it's not just... I've heard a few people here and there think it's just an entitlement thing, but if we look at just the prison numbers alone, to me, it's very clear it's not just an entitlement thing or somebody just trying to get a free lunch. I don't see it that way. So the last part of this, which I think is the most pivotal, important part, is, we talk about it from a cultural perspective and kind of addressing it from that front. It's really a spiritual battle, right?
Absolutely.
And I've pulled, and so Nakia and I both come from a Christian background, and we've talked in the past too, even about some of the dissonance in the church between races. I mean, we've got black churches, we've got white churches, we have white Southern Baptist churches, and we have black Southern Baptist churches, and we have somewhat mingled churches, but that seems to mostly be... It seems in those scenarios, it's usually like a few black people mixed in with a big group of white people. You don't see the opposite as much. And I don't know if that's just a population sizing thing, but I don't think it is. I think there's some other underlying things going on that are causing that. But so talking about it from the church perspective, Ephesians 4:1-7 says, I, therefore, a prisoner for the Lord, and this is Paul talking, who wrote Ephesians. I, therefore, a prisoner for the Lord, urge you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you have been called, with all humility and gentleness, with patience, bearing with one another in love, eager to maintain the unity of the Spirit and the bond of peace. There is one body and one Spirit, just as you were called to one hope that belongs to your call, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all and through all and in all. But grace was given to each of us according to the measure of Christ's gift. Man, I read that and I know, we do life together in a small group, and my heart hurts because I truly believe that we have the answer to all this. And I believe that we have the answer to the healing that we want to see and the healing that we need to see. But we face a tremendous force that wants to fight against even the concept of God or the aspect of him. And it breaks my heart because I believe Jesus has called us to love, and I believe that it would heal what we're facing and what's going on. And so do you have anything to add to that?
I agree 100%. Love and also forgiveness. Forgiveness is where we all need to be, because through that, it will eliminate hate and resentment in this cycle of things that seem to be destroying our country.
Right.
So I think exposure, if I was to give somewhat of a solution, is exposure,
right,
to each other. I mean, we're here. We're existing in this country. Right. We're here.
Yeah.
And since we are here, we want to maintain, unity and peace. And we've got to start with love. We got to start being very inclusive with every aspect of our lives, from the media to education. We have to include all people that make up the United States of America.
Yeah.
And I know we go off of majority and minority, but as you can see the trend that as the years go by, those numbers are changing.
Right.
And we're at some point going to be a whole melting pot of other.
Right. Yeah.
So when you read that scripture, it still boils down to what the truth is. One body, one God.
Yeah.
And until we realize that, we're going to be just fighting this losing battle. But people like you and I have to be the example the rest of our lives.
Right.
No matter what, we walk in love, we walk in forgiveness, and we teach our children that and our grandchildren.
Right.
And like you said, it will spread.
Yeah.
So we just have to keep doing that. We just got to keep doing it and not stop, just like our grandparents did before us.
Right. Yep. And then we've talked too about not growing weary of doing good.
Yeah, absolutely.
I just read that in Galatians this morning, and it brought you to mind, and I was like, man, yeah, because it's easy to grow weary in doing all that.
Right.
It's hard to keep it up when it feels like everything's kind of fighting back against you, to not keep going.
Right.
So, well, we should probably go ahead and cut it off at the time there, but I really thank you for coming again and chatting, and I hope this touches lots of lives. I really have big aspirations for what we're planning to do, and I would love to see, assuming all this COVID stuff passes sooner than later, I would love to see opportunities to have what I haven't named it officially yet, but I've got this concept in my mind of these multicultural dinners where you come in and you have to sit at a table with somebody that's not from your cultural background, and you have to talk to them. Now, getting people to participate voluntarily in that might be difficult, but I think we're at a point in the country now where people would be interested in doing something like that, and I'm hoping that as we press forward and as we do more interviews and more talks, it just kind of brings more to light. So thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
And we hope y'all enjoyed it too. And we've got more coming. If you want to help out, we are actually actively looking for board members to be on the board of the nonprofit and help us make decisions and push direction and stuff like that. We could use some help in media and as well as just kind of getting things rolling. So if you liked what you saw, reach out to us. You can go to lovegraceunity.com, and there's a form at the bottom there you can fill out with interest. But we love y'all. We love you, whoever you are, wherever you come from, wherever you've been. And we pray and hope that you are blessed through this. Thanks again.
All right.